Have you heard the tale that every 7 years, all of the cells in your body are replaced completely by new ones? The old ones die, new ones replace the old ones. I've heard that tale, and I got to thinking, it's got to be more complicated than that. And it is. Of course, I Googled it. For instance, here's what I found out. Red blood cells live for about 4 months. White blood cells live on average more than a year. Skin cells live 2 to 3 weeks. Colon cells die off after about 4 days. Sperm cells, lifespan of about 3 days. Brain cells typically last an entire lifetime. Sometimes you've heard it's 10 years, 7 years, but whatever. We're not the same person physically as we were a decade ago. Certainly not the same person as 2 decades ago or 3 or 4. And mentally and emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, we change as well. My political views have evolved over time. My musical tastes have evolved. My outlook on life has shifted a bit. I'm hoping, I'm wiser now than I was in my 20s or 30s. My personal lifestyle, the things I do every day, change. My kids are older and on their own, which changes someone. And of course, they're going through changes as well. My time is spent differently than when I had kids in the house. Some things I do more of now than I did a decade ago. A couple things, for example, skiing and bicycling. A decade ago, I had a used bike that I rode maybe a couple times during the summer. 20 years ago, I didn't have a season pass for skiing. I've had one now for at least 10 or 12 years because I like skiing. And I bought a bicycle 2.5 years ago, and I every summer and spring and fall, probably not through the winter, I bicycle a lot, 10 miles a day. Some things I do a lot less of. I'm a musician. I was trained as a drummer from middle school on and picked up a guitar along the way. And I think it's been a couple of years since I've been in a really good jam session. Been decades since I've played in a band. Used to play in a band a lot in my 20s and 30s, did a lot of gigs. Although now I pick up my guitar often and I sit down and play it and also go downstairs in my drum set, which is in really nice shape, a good set. I play that occasionally too. So I'm just curious, how different are you now from the person you were 10 years ago? Hey, it's Tim Patterson. This is Trade Show Guy, Monday Morning Coffee. I'm glad you could join me. This week I got a fun chat to share with you. I sat down with Lindsay Anvik of cnlist.com to talk about how trade show and conference planners should make sure they've got speakers that are really bringing their A game, and how exhibitors can use speaking opportunities to enhance their visibility at a show, and more. It's a fun chat. Here's how it went. I'd like to welcome business coach and international speaker Lindsay Anvik to Trade Show Guy Monday Morning Coffee. Lindsay, I appreciate you spending some time with me. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And so we connected through the Shank Minds group here in the last couple of years, and I'm glad you reached out and you want to talk about some interesting things. I thought that was a good idea that we can talk about that has to do with trade shows and events and conferences. That's mostly what I do, and it's what the podcast is about. But I'll go afield now and then. But let's start with who you are and what your basic day looks like these days.
Well, it's a mix between sort of pitching myself to meeting planners and conference organizers and, working on talks for whatever may be coming up for trade shows and conferences. So it's exciting because I'm always learning new things. I'm always trying to come up with new content. And I also spend a good deal of time talking to potential audience members to try to get the best content from them. So that's sort of how my day is broken up: pitching, working on talks, and then talking to the audience members.
Well, let's talk about some of the when you do talks, just give me an idea of how often you go out and do that and what your audience is looking for.
Sure. I say I travel maybe 2 or 3 times a month. And I talk about leadership, productivity, business development. I've done some on social media and marketing. So it sort of runs the gamut and across a lot of different fields. But I find that the talking points are very similar, even if it's, sort of healthcare versus, consumer product goods. A lot of the sort of ideas are the same and can be sort of tailored to whatever audience I may be in front of.
And I think one of the notes that we traded back and forth via email is that you talk about working with speakers and not giving canned talks. And I think I mentioned at some point that, several years ago, going back 8 or 10, for a short time with a partner of mine, we actually trained people to do public speaking. So I've done my fair share of it. I don't do much of it these days. I've got a lot of other things to do. Not that I wouldn't if the opportunity came up. But let's talk about public speaking, you say canned talks should be a thing of the past. What do you consider a canned talk, and what would be the alternative, I guess?
Well, I think someone sharing a story, or if they're on a book tour, that's a little bit different because obviously they're trying to sort of drive home, those kinds of things or tell that story. So that's a little bit different. But I find that audience members have heard the same talk if they're in the same industry and they go to 2 or 3 different conferences, they'll have heard the same speaker literally word for word give the same talk. And I just think that's such a miss on the speaker's, sort of part to not try to tailor it a little bit more to the audience, to try to switch it up and take, feedback from the previous conference to try to adjust their content to be even more relevant for the audience. So it's important to me to always have new things, always be adjusting, and not to sort of be put on autopilot, because then why do I need to be there? I may as well just press play and have a video and have them listen to me. I'd rather have it be a lot more interactive and valuable for them.
And I think one of the challenges for a lot of speakers is that they don't do it very often. Some do, some don't. But I think if they don't, then they're going to be as prepared as they possibly can. And that might be where some of that well, quote unquote canned comes in, because they want to make sure they're going to nail it. They're going to rehearse a lot. Whereas someone who does it a lot will be more prepared in the sense that they're able to shift and do things on the fly and ad lib and that sort of thing, just because they're more comfortable up there. I think that's probably one of the main differences. It reminds me of the old Mark Twain. Someone asked Mark Twain, to give a talk, and he said, "Well, how long do you want it?" And he says, "I don't care." And he says, "Well, no, if you need me to talk for an hour, I can start right now. If you need a 10-minute talk, give me like 2 weeks to prepare." So I think there's a lot to go into preparation. So obviously you want to give good information, but I think that also, where does that speaker come from?
Where does I think sort of just constantly being on top of whatever new tools that they have, new news that's coming out, things that may be relevant topically is important to sort of work in there. I've heard audience members, complain about there just being old data, old facts. They're giving talks about social media from 3 or 4 years ago, and so much has changed in terms of the landscape. It changes every day. And so you want to make sure, I think, when you're presenting, to make it as valuable for them as possible, to have most updated content, studies, things that are really relevant to them, so that they don't have a mishap.
Agreed. I think that the information, especially in that the tech world, the social media world, changes extremely quickly. New data comes in, things like that change. What do you think about if someone is not comfortable speaking, starting with being a panelist? That's a more relaxed approach. When they are called on, they get a chance to kind of work their way through a topic, and it's a much more relaxed setting. What do you think about that for getting exposure and getting practice?
I think that's a great idea. And, so many times, especially if the meeting organizer or the panelist organizer is, really ahead of the game, they have all the questions prepared ahead of time. And that way you can figure out some talking points and think about some examples, so you don't feel so on the spot. So it is a great segue to something that's longer, or on your own.
You mentioned in one of your emails that you thought speakers are underutilized for content creation. What do you mean by that?
I feel like the trade show managers they're so busy. I feel like no one has any idea the amount of work that goes into organizing or executing a trade show. It is an unbelievable amount of work, and education is just such a small piece. But because of that, I feel like speakers aren't tapped into enough, either before, during, or after the trade show, to add value to potential conference attendees or conference attendees, so that they either get excited about what kind of education may be coming, or that the trade show becomes something more than just an event. They become more of a educator and a thought leader. And so I am constantly trying to get trade show organizers and meeting planners to use me for email marketing, for blog posts, for articles, for, sort of videos, and not just about what I'm talking about at the show, which we always do promo things like that, but just tips for them, add value adds for conference attendees, so that, it's more valuable for them, and they feel even more value out of the organization or a conference that they may be going to.
I don't see a lot of crossover between these two groups, the exhibitors that are there to show off their wares and products and services, and the audiences there. And when you have all the conferences or the breakout sessions and all that, almost I would presume it makes sense that all that is aimed right at the attendees and not the exhibitors. And yet some of the exhibitors want to be reaching those attendees through that speaker outlet or that platform. Do you work with exhibitors and managers and things like that have a chance to get in front of that audience? How does that play into what you do? I'm just curious.
Yes, I definitely try to encourage those clients whenever they can to think of something creative that is not just pushing their product, but is them as a thought leader in their industry and is giving something beyond just buy my product or service. That's giving something not just me, but about what can I do for you? This is why you should, listen to me because I'm an innovator, or because this is where I see the industry growing, or this is how I've pivoted my business and how you can pivot yours. So I would definitely encourage exhibitors when they have a great story or have done something remarkable to reach out to conference organizers to be a speaker, since they'll be there anyways. And the other thing is, I wish that conference and meeting planners would do more education for exhibitors. So I, just before this interview, was giving a webinar for exhibitors, which is their first that they'd ever done for exhibitors, because when exhibitors are there, they're busy selling, they're there to make deals. They don't have time to do education. And like you said, the education's focused on the audience and the attendees. And so I think there's a lot of value to helping those exhibitors merchandise their booth better, have the right marketing materials, be prepared before they get there so they can maximize social media and sort of marketing efforts so that they're prepared, so that they have some things to think about to have the best show possible, which I think would only enhance their experience and then, of course, enhance the attendees' experience.
In the past, I've actually spoken at a couple of fairly large trade shows about exhibiting. I think the challenge with that, though, oddly enough, is that doing that at the show is probably not the right place. These were not well attended. They were, okay attended, but not great attended. And because the exhibitors are busy, they're out doing the show, and talking to them about exhibiting and being better at it at the show is probably not the place to do that. Although, and I found that out kind of the hard way, I guess, trying to be the guy that would teach that. But I think when you talk about doing a webinar for exhibitors prior to the show, to look at it, whether it's a month or 3 months down the line, that they're kind of examining from that angle, that actually sounds like a maybe a better approach to reach exhibitors versus reaching the attendees. The attendees are all going to go on together and they're going to be there at the show. The exhibitors have a different job at the show. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I see so much value, with your sort of wealth of knowledge about sort of the soup to nuts trade show industry. I think there's so much that you could, help exhibitors with. And I wish there was more of a coming together of meeting planners and trade show organizers before the show to sort of help, exhibitors with that. But I understand they're busy doing a million other things. They're trying to get booth space filled. They're trying to, make sure contracts are signed. There's a lot going on. But I think that those types of small value adds, enhance the exhibitor wanting to come and attend. And like I said, it also helps the attendees experience when they're there, because the exhibitor's more prepared. They have a better looking booth.
Before we wrap this up, I'm curious what you would give, what advice you would give to show organizers that are trying to bring in some good speakers. Where did they look in that industry, regardless of the industry? What kind of rocks can they uncover to get speakers that they may not have found before, or do they go for the top most recognized? I'm just curious how you would advise them to approach getting good speakers.
I think referrals are, one of the best ways. So looking to see, what other conference organizers have had good experiences with them, talking to audience members and having them sort of do a survey where they can fill in someone that they've seen that they may have seen at another trade show or conference is another great way. And then being open to someone like an exhibitor or, someone who may not necessarily be a $10,000 or $20,000 keynote speaker, but someone else who has a lot of sort of value to add and can enhance the, sort of enrichment of the audience experience. Is important to sort of be open to to other options aside from that really sort of expensive keynote speaker. Because I think if you could divide that up by 3 or 4, you could actually get more education and possibly a more sort of enriched education platform.
I just was thinking through this, from someone who's outside. I don't work with organizers as much as exhibitors. And so I'm not sure if the organizers, how they find those people, and based on the answer you just gave, I wonder if a lot of these larger shows, even the larger shows, are inundated with people looking for opportunities to speak, or if they're actually scrounging for somebody. I mean, I've applied to a couple of shows and I've been turned down because I was basically too late. I just didn't get in the game quick enough. But I've been accepted at a couple as well. And it makes me wonder, because a lot of people could speak that aren't even considering speaking.
Right,
so are they, do you get the sense that a lot of these organizers have way too many to choose from, or they're really scrambling to get someone good? I'm just curious.
I think that a lot of them are always looking, because they don't want to have the same people every year. And so I think as soon as the trade show ends, that it restarts all again. I remember one of the organizers of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, they said, well, when do you start working on the parade? And they said, the day after Thanksgiving.
The day after, right.
Right.
It's like any year-round event that has kind of a season, like it's a basketball team or something. When do you start? Well, we take a day off and then we start again,
Right, exactly. So I think reaching out to them as early as possible is the best sort of route. And they may say, listen, we don't take speaker, or thinking about it until March. But then in March you can reach out again and,
right.
Make a connection. And I think a lot of them are sort of starving for new ideas, whether it's exhibitors or thought leaders or someone bringing something interesting to the table. As long as you're sort of helping them with ideas, I think they're welcome to and open to someone new and something new, because they want the conference or trade show to be as exciting as possible.
Yeah. Lindsay, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Where can people find you online? What's the best place to track you down?
You can find me at my website, www.seendless.com. So as in see your endless potential.
Yes. There you go.
Or Lindsay, LANDSAY at seendless.com.
Cool. Lindsay, thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And thanks again to Lindsay Anvik of seendless.com for joining me this week on Trade Show Guy Monday Morning Coffee. I truly appreciate it. Trade Show Tip of the Week goes to you if you're ever called upon to speak, whether it's at a trade show, an event, a conference. If you're not a professional speaker or someone who's done a lot of it, it can be daunting, believe me. And it took me a long time to learn. Even though I spent decades as a radio guy, it took me a long time to figure out how to actually speak in public. It's an entirely different skill, and it is a skill you can learn. So some tips on if you're going to be speaking at like an event or conference, trade show. Number 1, know your material inside and out. You've been hired as an expert, so that's probably not that big of a deal, but organize it, put it together. If you need to write and rehearse your presentation, so be it. I think that's a good thing, but don't memorize it word for word, because danger lies in that approach. Let's say you're in the middle of your presentation, you've got word, you know exactly what's coming out, and then something distracts you and you forget where you are. And then where do you pick it up? Better to have memorized a handful of bullet points and know that each bullet point's got a story or two and a couple of anecdotes maybe to go along with that, along with the information you're going to pass along. So that's a better approach. Number 2, don't abuse PowerPoint. It's so easy to jam too much information on each slide on your deck. Better to have more slides if you're going to use PowerPoint and put only one topic, one image on a slide. The best slides, to my mind, are ones that have a good image that really illustrates or creates an emotion based on what you're going to talk about, and maybe a word or two, sometimes even no words. Sometimes no PowerPoint at all. Just get up and speak from the heart with the passion that you feel about the subject. And number 3, look at people in the eye. Don't avoid looking at them. If you're not used to standing in front of 100 or 200 or whatever number of people, the trick is to look at somebody over here for a couple of seconds, look at somebody over here for a couple of seconds, and just kind of keep moving around. Maybe if you're more comfortable at starting, you can look above the audience by a foot or two, but just keep in contact with them in some fashion. So that's my 3 tips for public speaking. This week's one good thing is something I've been doing for about 11 and a half years, and that's getting up every morning and doing about 10 to 12 minutes of yoga. So my daily yoga. If I go back to my 20s, I had a roommate. We did a lot of yoga, and we got into a martial arts class for a number of years together. A lot of fun. But you kind of get away from that as time changes. Like I said at the beginning, we change, our lives evolve. But probably 15, 18 years ago, I decided I wanted to do some more yoga. And so I would, instead of going to class, I would just get DVDs at the library. And I would watch a DVD and do yoga for an hour. And then I thought, you know what? I only do that about once or twice a month, if that. So let me try something different. I really wanted to kind of get it back to it. So every day I thought, I'm just going to get up and do a very short routine, 10, 11, 12 minutes. It has evolved over time. I throw something in new, something out, something old goes out, but it's essentially the same thing I've done. A little stretching, a little breathing, it's just what I do. And I enjoy it. Starts the day right. A lot of people do other things, meditation, maybe take a walk, whatever it is. If you can find something that starts your day the way that you like it to, that you have control over it, then you can kind of take everything else in stride. And that is my one good thing. All right. That wraps up this week's edition of Trade Show Guy Monday Morning Coffee. My name is Tim Patterson. I thank you for joining me.